make a bit of a start. So this webinar is on managing the festive season whilst living with BDD, which is something that everyone on this webinar has experience of. Sadly, Mia had to drop out due to illness, but we're going to forge ahead without her and do our best. Tonight we've got the lovely Kim, Andy and Lawrence. I'm Kitty. I'm just going to be here for a few moments and then I'm going to disappear, and then I'll come back a bit later to ask the group some questions. So I thought maybe if we start, and with you guys just sharing a little bit about your experience with a focus on the festive season. I don't know if Andy, maybe you want to go first, because I know that you also had a message, to those watching. So I'm going to disappear now.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. So just checking that I'm coming up correctly. Kim, Lawrence, just to check, can you see me up on the main screen? Or is it just Kitty? Is it just Kitty? Or lack of Kitty? Okay. So fab. So yeah, my name is Andy Hall. We wanted to say with regard to this webinar that we're very mindful that the Christmas period is challenging for different people in different ways, but of course not everybody celebrates Christmas, and we think that and hope that the conversation that we'll have today will be relevant to people from all walks of life, in terms of holiday seasons and events and so forth, and the unique pressures that can be applicable to these different events in different cultures and so forth. So yeah, I suppose without further ado, as I said, my name is Andy Hall. I am 30. I grew up in Salisbury, and I would say that I experienced BDD full time from about the ages of about 17 onwards. My BDD was really focused on my ears as a child, and a lot of that came from significant bullying. Lawrence, I just wondered, would you mind muting yourself just for a second?
Yeah.
No worries. Thanks. So my BDD was mainly around my ears, and I then came across the BDD Foundation during my recovery and found a lot of their work really helpful. I managed to achieve a really positive recovery through the use of CBT, specialist CBT, and good old pharmacology. And today, I think that I live with the BDD very well. Occasionally it comes back to sort of be a bit of a pain, but overall, getting on. So that is me. Lawrence, I wonder, only because there's a segue into life in Salisbury, did you want to mention your background?
Yeah, well, I'm known to Andy. We went to school together to do our A levels in Salisbury as well. We connected later on about the experience we had at BDD. Funnily enough, I was also bullied as a youngster for my ears. My ears stick out. And so as a kid, I had sort of a small head, but big sticky out ears, which I inherited from my dad. But I suppose it really gathered pace when I got into sixth form and then on to university. I became very obsessed with my body. I had kind of what's colloquially known as big morphia. So this idea that you can never be too muscular. And I just channeled, I suppose, all of my own failure to accept myself into this one element of my life that I could control, which was my body and my body image. And I suppose that the difficulty came because I could, on the one hand, I was receptive to all the positive feedback about the apparent improvement in my health and in my physique. And that formed as a form of, that served as a form of self-reinforcement. of the behaviors that I had. The problem is that it became totally all consuming and I couldn't take a break. I was relentlessly self-critical, which I think is something that we're going to touch on the course of this webinar, is in learning to accept yourself. And I think that we've chosen to do it at this time because it's a particularly difficult time for that, with all the social engagements that we have and the impulses to feed, to drink, to party, and all of that can become very absorbing. But I think that also there's a sense in which you have to put that in its context, and if you don't, you won't learn to accept yourself and to kind of get to a sort of state of psychological equilibrium where you don't relentlessly punish yourself for the things that go wrong and for the lapses that you have at times like this. And that's an important step that you can take on the journey towards that equilibrium. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to talk about the particularities of this time, but also to use it as hopefully a springboard to a kind of better, more self-accepting state of being. And so yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for us to share our experiences of that and to impart some of the things that we've learned on that journey that we wish we had known, at the times that it was really difficult. Because I think that all of us have reached this place we're at now where we can talk about it, because we've sort of gained a certain perspective and understanding because of this journey that we've been on. And so we're going to talk a bit more about that. And yeah, just before I hand back, I've just cycled here from work, so that's why I'm still breathing rather heavily, and so I'll mute myself when I'm not talking, because otherwise you might be picking that up.
It's probably a bit better than my my pug in the background that's snorting and making really weird noises, chewing on his toy. So I do apologise if that's distracting. But is it all good for me to kick off from here? Yeah. Okay. So my name's Kim. I'm 34, and I live in Southbourne, Bournemouth, and I have lived with BDD, I think, since my earliest memories. And my earliest memories, I think, were around about sort of 5 years old. So it's been such a huge part of my identity. It was almost kind of my norm growing up. I grew up in an environment where my mum spent a lot of time in the mirror doing her makeup. And my dad was a bodybuilder, and we also believe had BDD. So I think it was something that was certainly, I was surrounded by. They ran a gym. So it was just very much something that was pushed into my psyche from a very, very young age. So that critical thinking, that critical way of being towards myself was just drummed in to me from my family life, and also just being a kid, in the 90s, surrounded by Barbies and magazines and this particular way of looking, and that was just a very important, that seemed like a very important aspect of life. And so yeah, it's been a huge struggle for me. I've had multiple fixations, as I call them. I remember when I was quite young, it started off, I'm trying to think. I mean, it used to be like unusual things, like the way that my freckles are arranged on my knees, or just comparing the look of my hand to the kid next to me's hand. And, or just a lot of mirror gazing, a lot of like this fascination with, how I looked and how unsymmetrical my face was, and it just took up a lot of time. But when you're young, it's kind of your norm, but as you get older, you start to see that it's obsessive and it's compulsive and it's very distracting from your life in general. So that's my background roughly with BDD. I don't know if we want to go on from that and talk about our Christmas situation, do you think, or should we go with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think unless Kitty jumps in with anything, I think let's do it. I think it's interesting, especially hearing what you were saying, Kim and Lawrence as well. I think I can relate very much to the different fixations, and I can also think about times where Lawrence and I we grew up together. I can remember some fixations, you know, when I was literally at Lawrence's house, like in the bathroom, for example. It's interesting to me. And in terms of Christmas and I suppose sort of big holidays and events, I've certainly noticed in the lead up to this Christmas, I've been thinking about sort of, you know, catching up with friends and almost visualizing the event. And I find it fascinating that, you know, even with, you know, having had therapy and so forth, it can be really easy to fall back into certain kind of traps and ways of thinking. And maybe, like as you described, Kim, from the way that things are so ingrained, that's why we fall into them. But that also brings me to something Lawrence was saying about forgiving ourselves, you know, when we fall into these ways of thinking, because, you know, we didn't choose to think, oh, this would be great, I'd love to have this kind of, you know, this challenge or this difficulty. Yeah, sometimes we engage with it, but, you know, it's often out of fear or obviously anxiety. But there can also be positives too. And I wonder if it would be helpful to talk first of all about some of the things that can be positive about this time of year or about other events like this. Don't know if anyone has any examples they want to share or any kind of tips.
Yeah, I mean, sorry if you don't mind me jumping on it. I mean, Christmas time for me, I've always, it's been one of my most favorite times of the year. So it's a time when my family would be their happiest. It was also a time that, you know, there'd be a lot of focus on us getting dressed up. So it was always a dress up occasion. But it was always a time that I looked forward to. In terms of, you know, in later years coping with Christmas, for me, there's been a multitude of steps to get there and a very holistic approach to my recovery. So I couldn't really pinpoint one thing, but there's a multitude of things that have helped me get to a space where I have more tools in my basket really to go to when I am struggling. So I mean, I guess that this is one of the things I was going to talk about. That holistic approach is actually one of the questions that we got further down the line. I'm just trying to think whether I should just start going into that now or if I should. But actually, I'll talk about my Christmas experience maybe, because should I go there? Yeah, okay. So I've never done a webinar before, guys, so bear with me. And I've just put my dressing gown on because I'm freezing, so bear.
Me neither.
So like I said, like Christmas for me has been a really like a really magical time and a time that I really look forward to. And in earlier years that was very much the case. You know, with my family, we really enjoyed it. So I can't remember any specific issues or problems in terms of my BDD when I was younger, again, because it was such the norm for me for there to be this kind of high, this normality around, you know, being dressed up and spending more time in the mirror probably than other families did. So that wasn't something that I had to hide from my family as such, because it was just something that we all kind of did, if that makes any sense. So the thing that I noticed with Christmas was later on in life. So around about my teenage years when I started drinking, and I started drinking excessively because I noticed that it was a way for me to shut down the voice of BDD. And although it caused me some awful life events, from the repercussions of getting, I would say, blackout drunk a lot of the time, it's been very hard for me to recall Christmases in my late teens and adult life, because I blotted it out really with alcohol. So that was one of my coping mechanisms that I wouldn't recommend, but it was something that it was a way of me coping at the time, which I accept now, and I don't put shame against that, because that was just that's all I knew at that time. So if you're struggling with that, then, you know, don't be hard on yourself. This is just something that you're going through at the moment. That was one situation. I've since stopped drinking alcohol, which has allowed me to have a much clearer view of myself and allowed me a lot more time to actually focus on healing, inner healing, and like I said before, that holistic approach to make me a stronger person. The other thing I wanted to mention, which has really, really affected me on a really deep level, is how expensive body dysmorphic disorder can be. I'm sure a few of you will share similarities here with me in the fact that when you have a fixation, be it your skin, your hair, your nose, anything, it can be anything. There are things out there that you can buy, or that you think that you can buy, that you think that will make it better or make it go away. So for me, it was always having the best makeup, the best skincare, the best hair care. It was always, I was getting loans to have the aesthetics, which cost thousands, cosmetic surgery, again, which cost thousands. I've got 3 loans that come out of my account, and it put me in, I couldn't really, because of the BDD, because the BDD always came first, because I had to soothe it and make it go away. That was where my money went. So I would literally struggle with my basic needs, like food and bills, and I'd find myself leaning on my partner, which was really a horrible feeling to have to do that. So obviously when Christmas comes along, I didn't have any money. I had nothing to be able to, because I'd spent it all on myself. So that gives you this horrible feeling inside that the BDD is already attacking you for the way that you look, but then you're doing things that are upsetting yourself and the people around you. So it's like, oh, well, you're ugly on the inside too. And it's just more fuel for the BDD. And that's why we have these addictions. That's why we have these extra problems that we and challenges, because the BDD constantly needs feeding. It's always hungry for more and more and more. And so then when Christmas would come along, and it would be, you know, I'd have no option but to go in further and further into my overdraft. So because I couldn't, the embarrassment of ever admitting, because a lot of the things that I was buying was secretive, the embarrassment of admitting that I'd spent all my money on myself and I couldn't spend it on my family and my friends was just too much to bear. But then, you know, the next year would come, the new year, and then I've got more debt, and the pull with the BDD dragging me more into more debt with new things that it needed. So that has been a really big thing to stomach. It's something that I still struggle with. I still have to have certain creams and things. It's something that I'm really, really trying to work on. But at the same time, it's been really, really difficult. So I just wonder if anybody else has had that experience. I hope that. It's always a weird pause.
I can definitely.
The pause is because I wanted to give Lawrence a chance to speak, because otherwise I would have jumped in and been like, yes.
I can definitely relate, Kim, to Christmas as being a sort of really special time for the family. It was for mine too, and the celebration comes with, you know, feasting. I think that was the thing that I found particularly troublesome, because of the facet that my BDD had of being sort of having an eating disorder attached to it. And that meant that there was this sense that if I overindulged, which it's natural to do at Christmas time, that I would then feel relentlessly guilty and self-critical about. And that's a reflection of, well, I suppose that where my priorities lay meant that I had to eat particular kinds of food, and I would be really insistent about that. So on the one hand, although I'd be very guilty about the bad things that I'd eaten, I was also, that made me more obsessive about the foods that fitted my macros. So so when it came to Christmas dinner, there were literally family conflicts between, you know, me and my brother over who would get the leftovers, because I wanted the turkey, because turkey is lean and turkey contains protein, and turkey fitted my macros. And if I made sure that I ate enough of that, then I wouldn't be as tempted to overindulge in the chocolate and dessert and things that I was going to pillory myself for anyway. So I think that there's a kind of, all of those elements to it are heightened. And how people, obviously, of course, Andrew and Kim talked about the prospect of seeing other people, and there was never any let up during any of that. It was as though the moment I had transgressed, people would know, people would be able to see that that I had overindulged, and then I would have to battle to get back to the place that I wanted to be and felt that I should be. And the failure to let up, I think, is something I now understand as having been counterproductive, not only mentally, but it inhibited my ability to sort of to be healthy and to eat healthily, because in a way I was so focused on it that any let up led to an immediate rush of cortisol and of stress, that would just leave me feeling lethargic and emotionally down. And all of that was harming sort of what I was aiming to do anyway. It meant that I put on weight more easily. It meant that I wasn't able to exercise, which is the other compulsive element or dimension to my BDD. And in hindsight, I just wish that I had seen that actually all of it is made a lot easier if you allow yourself periods of lapse, if you can let up on yourself for a time to understand that everybody does these things and that it's healthy for us mentally and physically to enjoy them, just without anything detracting from that, and that you will reach a kind of, as I said before, an equilibrium where you accept yourself always in a way that's more productive. If you're so puritanical with yourself, then in effect it just saps the energy you need to get better and to think about, you know, how what you're doing is kind of part of a bigger picture in which it's just one element of who you are and your life, and your friends and family don't view you any differently or any worse for having done what everybody does, which is to enjoy Christmas a little. And I think that was a really useful opportunity as I developed and as I kind of progressed along that journey, to actually see that my world didn't fall apart as I feared it would do because of the things that I had done at Christmas. And really, it might have been better had I just allowed myself to enjoy them and to relax.
That's so interesting. It's this sort of almost exposure therapy, isn't it? Kind of testing those boundaries. And I think that's something that it's made me think about, is just the perfectionism and the all or nothing thinking that comes with BDD. And I think, interestingly, there's almost some parallels around Christmas and holidays where maybe family, have very strong perfectionist views about what it should be like, and what they want it to be like. And, I think I can definitely think of many times where, as fantastic as my family are, I felt pressures about, I've got to be a certain way and present myself a certain way, you know, emotionally, physically, etc. You know, physically being there and being present. And you know, I think, Lawrence, you say something brilliantly about the nature of accepting that, you know, well, it's not always going to be easy to accept ups and downs. Ups and downs are a normal part of life, and I think, you know, when you can allow you know, forgive yourself for not being perfect, and that takes time. That really takes practice, and thinking about, you know, one of the prompt questions we have, we're saying about what's helpful or unhelpful in coping over the holidays. I think something that's definitely been helpful for me is similar to what Lawrence was saying, is giving myself just some self-compassion in relation to this, well, the same kind of self-compassion that I'd offer to other people, that, you know, if you overindulged, if, you know, you have too much to drink or too much to eat, or, you know, you have a bit of says tensions with your family, or you forget something or something happens, it's a very almost artificial time where we spend perhaps more time with our families or whoever our sort of, you know, our group is, more than we would day to day. And there's a lot of, you know, oh, go and see your aunt, or go and see your friend, whoever, who maybe we haven't seen since we were younger, and maybe were linked to our experiences that led to the BDD. And again, I'm speaking from a very specific set of circumstances, and also, you know, I think from all three of us, you know, we're talking about from backgrounds where we enjoy Christmas, and obviously that's not everyone's situation. But, you know, speaking from my own point of view, it's definitely just giving myself some flexibility about, you know, it'll, you know, if it's not okay, that's okay, and there's next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just something you said there, it's that voice in our heads, isn't it? I think that is, you know, that extremely critical negative voice. And I think something that has taken me a long time, and it always, it's a continuous practice, but really trying to pick up on that voice and really hear it, try and dissect it, write it down almost, or, you know, just kind of try and sort of, yeah, talk to it like you would if it was a friend talking to you, and soothing that voice, and just trying to, just because it can be completely illogical, and it can be like irrational, I should say. So it's just really trying to just tune into that inner dialogue during these times, I think, is really important. Very difficult when you're feeling really low, but it's like I say, it's a practice, it's a muscle that you have to build over time, and it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I forget, I remember we spoke in the kind of preparation for this webinar about a specific tool that I have found was really helpful in my recovery. And it's not something that I would use obsessively, thankfully, but it's certainly something that even now I refer back to, which was this sort of, I think they called it a traffic lights metaphor, or a traffic lights toolkit, and sort of establishing 3 columns of red, amber, and green, and writing in each sort of column, you know, what keeps me in amber, what keeps me in green, what keeps me in red. Not the right order. You know, what helps me move from, oh, here, my goodness, it's right on the screen. There we are. There it is.
Can you see it?
I can, as if by magic.
Okay.
Glorious. And look, there's 2 columns. What am I talking about? But yeah, so, you know, what are the signs that I'm in a good place? You know, what contributes to this? You know, actions, activities, thoughts, beliefs. What might make things harder or worse? And, you know, again, when I feel like I'm moving into more of a kind of uncomfortable space, what would I advise myself to do? What has been helpful before? And if it's not been helpful to sort of get me back to green, what at least helps me to stay in amber rather than heading to kind of crisis point? And yeah, you know, what then if I notice I'm heading towards red or crisis, what are the things I would do that can help me to come back down? A lot of that for me was just having a long sleep, and, you know, just giving myself time, permission to sort of recuperate. But as you said, Kim, as well, it's a muscle, right, that you train over time. And I think, yeah, it's each year that passes, I think that these skills can be strengthened, and through therapy, through building on positive relationships, and again, like moving away from things that aren't particularly helpful, whatever they may be for us individually.
Well, that's it. And the other thing as well, sorry to jump in again, but you've got to, I think I always have to remind myself, we've most of us have dealt with this mental illness for a lifetime. It's completely been ingrained into our psyche, and it's been a coping mechanism. It's almost hard to separate yourself from it, but it's one of those things that, it takes, if you've spent a lifetime in that headspace, it's going to take a good long time to get yourself out of that headspace. So just, I think, being really patient with yourself as much as you can. I know it's difficult in this day and age, but I think that just having those times to step back and be like, look, breathe, it takes time, just, and I think that really, really does help, because when I started my healing journey, it was always this quick fix. Why am I not feeling better? Why is this not working? I'm doing this. But, maybe a couple of months and I'm still not feeling better. But it's whether you know it or not, it really is just starting to help you build that muscle in your brain, I think, in your nervous system. And just when you have those times when it's like 2 steps forward and then feels like a million steps back, you're still going up and up and up and up in your recovery and your healing. So just hold tight, if that makes any sense.
And you learn something, don't you, with each little sort of pitfall. Maybe it doesn't seem like it in the moment, but I can definitely think of the times looking back where, even if it's just resting, or if it's just, another sort of wobble leads to a conversation down the line, or, is part of that reflective process. Like it's not all, it's far from easy, but it does get easier. And I think before I don't give Lawrence another chance to speak, I'm just thinking again, something that you touched on, Kim, the idea of kind of comparison, and how, we want quick fixes and we want things to be over, like that. And we live with these things, some of us for very long periods of time. And of course we want them to be quickly fixed. But I think that's also the irony, the nature of BDD, is that it is, it's on, obviously, because it's on the OCD spectrum, it involves this kind of round and round rumination in comparison to others. And something I have really enjoyed becoming more and more aware of over the years is that a lot of what I took for fact wasn't the case. People who I thought were living this high life because of images on Facebook or Instagram, or even things people said to me that I took as gospel, in hindsight, actually, using some curiosity, I suppose, I was thinking, well, actually, what do I know now? Or what did I assume that I knew? And made me think of that.
Just looking back, just look at, like, even if you look at yourself a month ago, that I always see just a slight difference somewhere. There's always a seed that's going to be planted. It takes a long time for that seed to be nourished, for it to grow into a beautiful flower, which we all are, pushing our way towards, and we will get there. Lawrence, are you there? I feel like you.
Yes. Sorry, I did have to move because my wife finished work in the living room and she went to take her shower. And I thought, for the benefit of some of the people who didn't want to see her emerging from the shower, I would move. And now I don't look like someone in the witness protection program, so that's also nice. I definitely echo all of those things. I think what both you, Kim, and Andrew pointed to there is that I think what's particular about BDD is its multifaceted nature, but I think that it certainly shares this, it shares anxiety across its different facets, be that how we eat, how we look, how we exercise, certainly in my case. And so it's really about how you come to arrive at that place of greater self-acceptance, so that this period of time is viewed in its proper context as just one in which everybody lets go and celebrates, and we can ourselves enjoy that without too much anxiety. And the technique, I suppose, that I wish I had known earlier in life, and it's actually, I suppose it's along the same lines as the color coding framework, is that they're both neuro-linguistic frameworks. So it's about taking control of the conversation that you have with yourself. So you can observe features of that conversation that can indicate to you that you're acting more in line with what your obsessions are telling you than with what you would rationally conclude otherwise. So if, for instance, you're gripped by the fear that any mistake you make at the Christmas period is going to have consequences that you can't bear, you have to understand, or you can recalibrate that conversation with yourself to see that actually, I know, that even if things go off track as I see them now for a time, I can get back. It's rather just one period among the continuum that is our lives, and that life has fluctuations in it. And so rather than obsessing over the things that feel like you're on the way down, you can understand that actually it's just part of a life that's in flux, and the down periods are often followed by the up periods. So what you don't want to do is to have a conversation that sends you further down, that adds layers of self-criticism to it, that actually prevent you from sort of riding it out and getting back to the better periods. And I think the color coding framework is one such framework. And there's also a kind of broader way in which you scrutinize the thoughts you're having and consider, for instance, is this a thought that I'm having, a worry that everybody has? So if it's a worry that everybody has, like, oh, I've eaten too much, then you can already contextualize it in a different way to if it's entirely focused on you. Because if it's entirely focused on you, then that negative conversation is also entirely focused on you, and you lose the opportunity to see that actually other people are able to cope with these same things that I'm experiencing, and I can sort of copy or try to learn from the way in which they don't go into a negative spiral of self-criticism. So all of that sounds quite verbose and wordy, but I would really encourage people to look at the literature about neurolinguistic programming and how it works, because it can, at the very least, give you that opportunity to interrupt that moment of self-criticism and to see if you can guide your thought processes in a more positive direction. And that's what, in essence, it's about. And the color coding also enables you to do that, to have a conversation with yourself about what has helped me get in the past from red to amber, or from amber to green. If you get locked in that downward spiral of self-criticism, you're unable to have that conversation. So I think that and as Kim and Andrew have both said, it is a muscle that you learn to develop and to flex, and it gets stronger and you get better at it with time and with practice. But for me, definitely that's been the framework that's helped make a difference. And what's great about it as well is that it's broadly applicable to the kind of anxiety and the general pathology that is sort of self-criticism and non-self-acceptance. So when there are other things going on in your life, perhaps that are unfamiliar but troubling, not have I eaten incorrectly or have I missed my workouts, but just the things that happen in life that we find challenging, the unexpected death of a close relative or something, you can engage those same techniques, and they can also help to produce better outcomes. So it's useful in that sense, because I think that in some ways, my experience has been that even when you tackle some of the acute facets of body dysmorphia, eating disorders, exercise obsession, or a compulsive sort of skincare beauty regime, sometimes those anxieties can still manifest in other areas of our lives. And so these techniques are really helpful in that respect.
I don't know if you go to a like a fair, and then you have those, they're like, you've got a hammer, and then you hit one head down and another one pops up and you hit that down, and you're just constantly, that's sometimes how I feel with BDD and addictions that have kind of, spread off from that. They'll just kind of keep popping up unless you sort of try and figure out how to get to the, like you say, right into the nitty gritty of it and try to dissect it as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well as something that I found useful to reflect on is that sometimes we're not in a place where we can do that, and that's okay as well. None of this has to be done at once, and it's a process in our own ways and in our own sort of context of our lives. And I think that sometimes it's just surviving and then trying to thrive a bit later, and I'm conscious that some people will likely be going through really difficult times, and again, it's I suppose, it's, without sounding cold, it is literally each to their own, right? Especially during periods of intensity like Christmas. And speaking of intensity, I wonder if Kitty's looked at the time and thought, oh my god, I need to jump in right now. So
Well, I thought I'd just pop in because I did notice the time, but you guys have all done so well without me that you've answered quite a few of the questions on my list. But I thought I would, maybe actually just speak a little bit, because you've all touched on things that I've experienced as well. And I thought, maybe I'll say something. But I mean, Kim, you mentioned, the difficulties with finances at Christmas. And for me, there have been times in my life when I haven't been able to work. So I've had no income. So I haven't been able to buy people presents. And then there's that shame, I've got the BDD, which, has stopped me from working, which now means that I can't buy people presents. And it goes back to that self-criticism that Lawrence mentioned. You're feeling ashamed about how you look, but then you're ashamed about not being able to be the way you'd like to be with your family at Christmas. And it compounds it, and Andy, you mentioned, family members who are super keen on Christmas and want everything to be a certain way. And that's something I can relate to, but me not being able to be involved, me being in my room, not able to engage with my family, do the things, on Christmas Day or the following days that they wanted us to do together. And it went back to the self-criticism. I was there hiding in my room, feeling like I'm not capable. And for me, the one thing that I've learned over the many years of having BDD is, if the one thing that we can do is to be kinder to ourselves and accept that actually not every Christmas is going to be a great Christmas, whether it's BDD or there might be other things in our future. It's one period in time, and all we can do is be kind to ourselves, pick ourselves up when we can, but not beat ourselves up over what we can't do this time. Because I think we've all, everyone in this group has spoken about challenging Christmases. Yet we've come a long way, but it's taken us, I can say for myself, it's taken me years to be in a better place with Christmas. With that in mind, I was also thinking one of the questions that we haven't got onto is Christmas. We're around families. That's challenging, in itself for many of us. Is there anything that you guys would have found helpful for your family to know in the lead up to Christmas in terms of BDD? Lawrence, maybe it was something about, how they would handle you and food. Andy, maybe it was about, not being so perfectionist in terms of, what you could or couldn't do and the timings around it. Kim, maybe, understanding that you know, maybe in social situations, you know, might not be as comfortable, or you might take longer to get ready. You know, I was just thinking, is there anything that we could share to any family members who are watching this about how they can support, you know, their loved ones with the BDD at this time?
If you don't, I mean, one of the things that I think I have struggled with at times with when I've tried to talk to certain people, and they're only trying to help, when you say, oh, you know, I'm struggling with this and BDD, and they're like, oh, well, you know, it gets minimized a bit. Well, oh, we all have hard, you know, tough days. We all have those days. Or you're really, I don't know what the issue is. I can't see what you're seeing. And it's like, sometimes I think in those situations, we don't want to minimize those times and those feelings and those thoughts that are going through someone's mind, because it can be extremely actually quite dangerous headspace to be at times. And I think family members, or friends, just listen and don't make assumptions about what they might be going through, unless, you know, maybe you've gone through it yourself. And you can resonate with it, I guess, but it's a very unique situation for each individual BDD. It's although we have similarities, there are so many things that differ, and our, you know, our lives, and it's just, yeah, I just think just allow that person space, and also when someone shares about their BDD, that is huge. It's massive, because BDD is all about shame and it's all about secrecy. So for somebody to actually just come out and even just air out that they're feeling a particular way in relation to their BDD, that is huge. So you should be like really like fist punching the air, but not in front of them, maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to answer some of the questions in the chat that I think are very relevant to this, it's such a performative time with photographs, for example, you know, with social media, with, you know, I think with all that in mind, that's something I really struggled with, and sometimes do. I think it can be really triggering, and we think, oh my gosh, what is this, you know, and these kind of snapshots. I think something that can be really helpful perhaps is if you feel comfortable and safe enough to have this conversation with people, to say, listen, do you mind if we don't take photos this year? Or if we do take photos, would you mind giving me a bit of warning? Or, you know, maybe, you know, asking before putting it up on social media, or just agreeing not to put it up on social media at all. Maybe, you know, again, having these kind of frank discussions. And I know that opens up a degree of risk because people may not understand. I think that my fear was constantly, because I had been told it, I was told that I was vain, and people saying to me, oh, you know, you're obsessed with this. And I think, yeah, I am, but not in the way that you think. It's not that I'm like, God, yeah, let's put me out there on a poster. It's about, please, for the love of God, do not. And I think that maybe directing people to this webinar, even just this section, or to the BDD Foundation website, and just maybe giving people some information, if you feel that it's something you're comfortable with, or something that would be helpful, so that families can understand, you know, or close people in our lives can try to understand that this is something that has a really serious effect on us. And it's not vanity, it's not, you know, being silly, and it is sometimes more than, you know, this, you know, the norm of, you know, body image worries. It's something that can be, as we know, can cause significant distress, and it is quite poorly understood. But again, I think that the greatest help, I think, can come from, as Kim said, giving space, giving understanding, like listening. And I would say to my family and friends, you know, looking back, I would say that, can you just try to keep an open mind and really listen to what I'm saying, and be considerate in, you know, your body language and the questions you say in response, because as you say, Kim, it is huge to make ourselves so vulnerable when many of us just want to hide and want to obscure this, when actually, you know, we could really benefit from that understanding and that compassion from the people who are closest to us.
because of the stigma that can be attached to it. Like you said, I've been called vain quite a few times in my life, and it just makes you go in more and more and more into yourself when people say that. And unfortunately we can't educate everyone, but there is a set, like, with someone taking your photo, I think we have absolutely every right to say, I don't want you to post photos of me on your Instagram, or you have every right. It's a picture of you. So you should take ownership of that, and not feel guilty for saying to that individual that, look, I'm not comfortable with being on social media right now. I'm not comfortable with you taking my photo right now. Which is very difficult, and not every family member. You're probably going to have quite defensive family members at time, and they'll try and sort of shut you down on that. But just got to be really, hold your ground, hold your boundaries in place. As hard as that can be, you have every right to take ownership over how over yourself and how you want to be shared.
I think it's really interesting that actually the vanity point isn't one that we raised when we had the preparatory call not too long ago, but it's something that's clearly been a feature of this for all of us. Is we have a sort of we begin with a negative self-perception already, and the vanity and the kind of, I don't know, the negative moral judgment that implies only feeds that negative self-perception. And so that's something that we're sort of already, and as well as that, it feels as though we consider mostly those who are vain are those who really have what we so greatly desire, which is they have great looks and the things we want, but feel desperately that we don't have. So the accusation of vanity, I think, then is particularly needling, because it at once accuses us of the thing that's wrong with wanting to be better, but not ourselves having the things that we want, that we normally associate with that accusation. And I think that my experience with my family was one that I think is sort of instructive, in as much as they were very generally, I think that mental health was not greatly well understood by my wider family, but I think at least they understood that they didn't understand it well. And I think that the basic thing that they understood is not to, if I'm struggling, and I think that they recognized that I was, not to feed it by sort of calling me out on the idiosyncrasies and all of the weird demands that I was making about the food and about my being able to fit my exercise into the family fun schedule and things like that. And they just sort of, although that, occasionally my mum would chime in with, Lawrence, I think that it's great, all this exercise and things, and eating well, but remember that you look good as you are. And just every now and then she would say that to me. And it might not have made a big difference to my behavior at the time, but in the longer term, it really did make a positive difference, because it started gradually to become true. And I began to accept what she was saying about me, and she and my wider family didn't sort of undermine that by adding an additional layer of criticism of, oh, why are you so obsessed with yourself, and don't you seem vain, and things like that. So I think that there's actually a positive lesson there for families, just not to expect that you can tell your children or your brother or sister just to kind of the equivalent of just buck up and get better, because it's not as simple as that. But there are things you can do and can say, and you can show, you can demonstrate. I think you can lead by example and show them the compassion that they aren't yet ready to show themselves, but one day they might be ready to.
It's almost like when someone tells you to calm down when you're obviously not calm. And it's like there's that kind of that can sometimes happen with when families or family members, say things like that, sometimes I think they're trying to be helpful, but it's not going to change that person's mindset there and then. I just wanted to quickly, because I just saw on the Q&A, there's someone from New Zealand. Hello, I'm half Kiwi. And you asked the question about recovery and whether you can find a time to, whether you can find a point in your life where you live without BDD. There are definitely people out there, aren't there, that say that they've completely beat it. I would recommend listening to the Beating BDD podcast. That has literally helped me so much, because it's given me so much hope of just hearing people's stories that are in recovery. And me personally, I can say I am in recovery, but I can also say that it is something that I still have to work on, that it does spring up at times. But my goodness, I'm so much more at peace now than I was, say, a year ago. So just see it that way. It might not be that you get rid of it completely. It might be something that you always have to work on, but your quality of life will get better by just doing the work over time. And it takes time. Just be patient with yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I think something that I really recognized in my recovery was that my obsession to want to get 100% recovered was part of the problem. I think that over time I've learned to kind of carry it in a way that I don't really recognize. I mean, so much of my life is not affected by BDD now. And my parents will say to me, "Oh, well, I wonder if there are times when you just experience what we might consider normal body image worries that everyone has." I think that even if it's not 100% gone, doesn't mean that you can't have a fantastic life. And there are some other comments I just want to touch on as well. People asking questions about coping with changes in routines in different environments and seeing yourselves in certain mirrors from certain angles, and how do we cope with kind of the intensity. If you can, I think being open with people that you trust about, in advance, about maybe needing more time, and that you might find this challenging if your routine is shaken up and so forth. And having those people or those things that you can rely on, journaling, whatever it might be that is useful to you to help you navigate those ups and downs. And that's what I've got.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself then. There's also a question about socializing and, the difficulties when friends, really expect us to be somewhere, and, it's tough for us to, it was tough for me. I'm not going to say it's tough for everyone else, but for me, I found it really difficult to go to events. And I have missed quite a few events, over the years. That could be significant birthdays. It could be, various different things. And I would say that for me, I pushed myself where I felt that I could, whilst trying to be kind to myself when I really, really couldn't. And I think it's getting that balance, maybe, there were some years when it was just too much for me. And I had to tell myself, look, there will, this will come around again next year, and there will be opportunities again. This won't be the last party that I get an invite to. And I think it's being kind. And if you can share with those people who are expecting you to be somewhere that actually you're having a tough time at the moment, you may not have to, you don't necessarily have to go into details about why, tell them how much you care about them, and say how much you'd love to be there, but you're not feeling so good. That would be my advice, because that's what I've done. And I don't know if any of you guys have, different thoughts on going to events, or maybe even feeling unable to go to them.
No, I think that what you're saying resonates really well, and I would often fear people's responses, and sometimes people have been annoyed or upset with me, but that passes. And sometimes I would worry, well, if it doesn't pass, does that mean I lose the friendship or the closeness with that person, family or otherwise? But often things have a way of repairing, and in time, people can come to understand. Sometimes there are friends in my life that have been very important to me who didn't understand, and and life has moved on, and that's okay too. I try to remind myself that when I'm in it, and it may not feel like it can get better, but it absolutely can.
That's great. I don't know if anyone's got any final thoughts, but we have just done 8 o'clock. So that's actually pretty good timing. But thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories. And I really hope that this has been of use to some of you guys watching. But thank you.
May I say one last thing for the final comment is that, yes, I think that all of us will probably resonate that we've looked in the mirror and felt disgust or despair, but it can and really can get better.
It's honestly, it's something that I've noticed through doing, like work like CBT and having a very holistic approach just to my lifestyle and, stop drinking and things like that, that now when I look in the mirror, there might be, I used to, like, every little angle, it was just so much for my brain to it couldn't compute. Now when I look in the mirror, I still have my moments, but I actually see I just see me, not the fixations as much. So I can totally relate to that and feeling like, and it just not wanting to go out, and I completely relate to that. But there honestly, there is a way that you can get to a point where that is not your main focus. I promise.
Yeah, agreed.
Lawrence, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just add to that not only I think is it possible to get to a better place, and it's great that everybody here has heard from those of us who've been on that journey, so they know they can go on that journey too. But also in the broader sense, I think that the things you learn through cognitive behavioral therapy are really great techniques that will work even when, and Kim talked about playing whack-a-mole. You can learn these techniques and they can help you all through your life. So I think it's great that people are engaging with this content, and I'd really recommend that people continue to do so and to see what's out there.
Thanks, everyone. I guess my final thought would be, if there's any evidence that actually time and therapy and self-compassion can get us all into a better place, I think this would be it, because there have been Christmases when I haven't left the house. Lawrence has been struggling with eating. Andy, you've mentioned your struggles, and Kim, so have you. And now look at us, we're on a webinar showing our faces, showing parts of ourselves that we've wanted to hide from the world, and we're on this webinar. So I hope that gives you hope. But thank you, everyone, for being here, and I'll say goodbye.